Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving right into an incredibly complex, honestly heartbreaking psychological collision that you or maybe someone you know might have lived through. We're talking about what happens when deep romantic love, fierce family loyalty, and the sudden, jarring trauma of relational disappearance all crash into each other. Picture this: a loving, committed relationship just vanishes in total silence. And specifically, we're looking at situations where this happens because an adult child disapproves of their parent's partner, and that parent chooses to just disappear rather than communicate.
Which brings us to a really fascinating, almost haunting question. Can love actually survive sudden silence? Think about the central paradox here. How does a relationship that was genuinely intimate, deeply committed, full of shared plans for the future, how does it suddenly feel to the abandoned partner, like it never even existed? It's just such a jarring shift, right? One day, you're building a life with someone who makes you feel safe, who grounds you, and the next day, that exact same person becomes the source of your absolute deepest distress, entirely through silence.
Section 1. The Central Paradox.
To really wrap our heads around this sudden rupture, we need to draw a hard line between an ordinary breakup and ghosting. Look, an explicit breakup, even a spectacularly messy, awful one, hands you a grief narrative. It gives you a clear boundary. You know it's over, and your mind can finally start the heavy lifting of grieving. But ghosting? Ghosting completely obliterates cognitive closure. It leaves you in this open loop of pure narrative chaos. You aren't just missing a few pieces of information. Your brain is literally trapped in a prediction error. It's desperately spinning, trying to map out this totally unmappable terrain, just to make sense of things. The uncertainty is, quite frankly, unbearable.
Section 2. Anatomy of the wound.
So what's actually happening in your brain and body when someone just vanishes? Well, it comes down to a crucial concept called ambiguous loss. Pauline Boss pioneered this framework, and it's brilliant. Think about it. What happens when you're forced to grieve someone who is physically still walking the earth? Someone who is hugely significant to you, and honestly, someone who might actually still love you, but they are completely relationally inaccessible. Ordinary mourning just breaks down. It's obstructed because you don't have stable facts. You're left suspended right in the middle, caught between connection and separation. You can't fully hope for a reunion, but you also can't fully let go and mourn. And that state of limbo triggers an acute attachment injury. You see, our human attachment system is biologically hardwired to protest when we're separated from a significant figure. When your person withdraws without a single word, your system doesn't just gently power down. No, it surges into high-alert protest behavior. In fact, neuroscience shows that our brains process sudden social ostracism using the exact same neural pathways as literal physical pain. So that rumination, the obsessive checking of your phone, the intense anxiety, that's not a sign of pathological weakness. Not at all. It is a highly predictable biological response to a massive rupture in your felt safety. Your system fixates on the unanswered question because to your biology, this kind of abandonment feels like a mortal threat.
This really hits the nail on the head regarding the secondary wound of ghosting. Take a look at this quote. "The person I would normally turn toward for comfort is the person whose disappearance is causing the pain." I mean, wow. It's a profoundly destabilizing paradox, isn't it? The ending of the relationship is the first loss, but the sudden evaporation of your emotional sanctuary, right at the exact moment you need it the most, is the second, and often way more traumatic loss. Your mind is desperately seeking safety from the exact same person who just made themselves entirely unsafe.
Section 3. The family ecosystem. Okay, to truly understand this dynamic, we've got to zoom out a bit, and we need to do this without assigning malice or creating cartoon villains out of anyone. If we look at this through the lens of Bowen's family systems theory, we're looking at a classic case of triangulation. Basically, the tension between the parent and their adult child, maybe it's fears of aging or the family restructuring or shifting loyalties, that tension gets temporarily stabilized by pulling a third person in, the romantic partner. The intimate relationship suddenly morphs into this high-stakes competition for emotional allegiance. And the new partner? They unwittingly become the lightning rod for all of the family's pre-existing unresolved anxiety.
Let's look at the parent first. Why ghost? Rather than just assuming they're being cruel, we need to consider some competing hypotheses. The parent is very likely caught in a crushing internal crossfire, just a massive conflict of loyalty. They might be absolutely terrified of losing their adult child. They might be relying on severe emotional avoidance just to handle the intense cognitive dissonance of loving a partner but still leaving them. Their silence? It's probably a defensive emotional shield, not some calculated, malicious attack. They are essentially avoiding a devastating emotional confrontation with their own grief and shame.
Now, what about the adult child? Again, we have to stay objective. We're looking at possibilities here, not automatic accusations. The child might have very genuine protective instincts or totally legitimate concerns about the partner. On the flip side, they might be terrified of their family changing. They could be acting out of unresolved attachment needs of their own, or maybe engaging in control dynamics, literally using their affection as currency. The reality? It could be any one of these, or, a messy mixture of several.
Section 4, the mirror effect.
Because of this incredibly complex ecosystem, you end up with 3 entirely different narratives coexisting around the exact same relational rupture. It's fascinating. The abandoned partner feels completely discarded, like their value was totally erased. Meanwhile, the parent genuinely feels they had absolutely no choice, that they had to protect the peace just to survive. And the adult child? They truly believe they were acting as the noble protector of their family's well-being. What's wild is that all 3 of these highly subjective narratives psychologically coexist at the exact same time. Every single person in this ecosystem can feel 100% justified in their own reality.
And this is absolutely crucial, we have to make a hard distinction between intention and impact. A parent might sincerely believe they had 0 good options, they might be acting purely out of fear, or just desperately trying to avoid conflict. But listen, intent does not equal impact. Avoiding conflict might fully explain the parent's behavior, sure, but it does absolutely nothing to erase the devastating psychological harm and the deep attachment injury that was inflicted on their partner.
So, where do we go from here? How do you actually move toward recovery? Well, first, we have to separate explanation from closure. We almost always assume we need the other person to come back, right? We think, I just need an apology, or I just need an explanation to finally heal. But closure, actually, scratch that. Real closure is an internal integration of the loss. It's about recognizing and accepting the present reality, even if you entirely dislike it.
Section 5, constructing internal closure.
So how does the abandoned partner reclaim their dignity when that explanation never, ever comes? It takes some very actionable steps of self-authorship. First, you have to name the facts of the silence, and you've got to do it without romanticizing them. Second, separate fact from inference. You know for a fact the silence injured you, even if you never fully uncover why they did it. Third, and this is massive, refuse self-erasure. You absolutely must recognize that another person's limitations, their avoidance, or their family enmeshment, none of that is a measurement of your lovability. And finally, you have to grieve the dual loss. You're grieving the loss of the future you planned, but also the loss of the person you thought you could turn to.
And all of this builds to a truly profound emotional paradox. Love does not equal relational capacity. It's a tough pill to swallow, but someone can genuinely love you, the connection can be entirely real, and yet they can still completely lack the autonomy, the boundaries, or the internal fortitude to actually stay in the relationship when the pressure mounts. Love, unfortunately, doesn't automatically guarantee courage.
I really want you to take this concept to heart. A relationship's ending does not retroactively erase its meaning. Just because a relationship has a tragic, avoidant, or totally uncommunicative conclusion, it doesn't mean the whole thing was a lie. It doesn't retroactively delete the intimacy, the personal growth, or the genuine attachment that you shared before the rupture happened. You don't have to surrender the beauty of what was just because the ending was handled so poorly.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought to wrap up today's explainer. What will you do with what remains unknowable? When someone else leaves the final chapter of your story entirely blank, your psychological integration really begins the moment you realize you don't actually need their explanation to validate your reality. The love was real, the loss was real, the silence was incredibly harmful, but your dignity and your future capacity for intimacy, those remain entirely yours. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.